Certainly as a military brat myself, and my son was a military brat. We moved a lot, and you're constantly in and out of different communities with different cultures, and you need to be respectful of that. Yeah, not try to impose your culture on somebody else. You need to live within their culture. This is not a place for your personal agenda. You're a fiduciary that must act in the best interest of the community as a whole. And we're looking for somebody who's going to not only have good answers but ask good questions.
A regular highlight of the HOA Insights podcast is our Board Heroes feature, where we dedicate one episode each month to celebrate the remarkable efforts of HOA board members. To us, a board hero is one of the 2 million elected volunteers who deserve recognition for excelling in a role that often goes unnoticed. Today, we're excited to spotlight one of these exceptional board heroes and share their inspiring story. If you match our definition of a board hero or know someone who does, please reach out to us. Our contact details and those of our sponsors are provided in the show notes.
Welcome back to HOA Insights, Common Sense for Common Areas. I'm Robert Nordlund, and I'm here to share the story of an unsung board hero named Sue York, someone I know personally. This is episode number 78, and if you missed meeting any of our other board heroes, you can find them easily on our website, hoainsights.org, on our YouTube channel, or by subscribing to HOA Insights on your favorite podcast platform. Now, let's hear a little bit about Sue and the story that she'd like to share.
My name is Sue York, and I've served on the volunteer board of FiPhO by Gentry Association for 24 years. When I'm not wearing my board member hat, I'm an educator, and I crochet, and other fiber art enthusiast. The 3 words I would use to describe my job on the board is to be patient, patient, and patient. The main story I'd like to tell about my years of involvement is my work in preparation and education to help the community thrive.
HOA by Gentry is a housing development that sprawls across 112 acres on the Hawaiian island of Oahu. The property is 36 years old and includes a mix of condos and single-family homes among its nearly 9,000 units. It has an annual budget of about $4.5 million. Sue's lived on the property for 31 years, has served on the volunteer board for the past 24 years, and currently serves as the secretary of the board. We decided to kick off this interview, as we often do, by asking Sue what motivated her to first join the board of the association.
We moved in 1993, which was coincidentally, we moved in my first semester of graduate school. So I needed a little bit of time before jumping feet first into any kind of volunteer work, because I was already pretty busy. My father had retired from the Navy and gone into real estate. And he said, well, if you're going to buy in a planned community, you better get on the board and make sure it's done right. So that's where I've been. The notion that I was tied to this growing community, and my financial stability was tied to this community, that I needed to be involved in that. It was just a natural kind of a flow from anything else. I've always done a lot of volunteer work with the Red Cross and the Boy Scouts, so it was natural for me.
It's always good to hear from our board heroes that their urge to volunteer their time for the thankless job of board service is nothing short of second nature to them. That heart for service serves the community associations of our country very well. Sue has clearly demonstrated her selflessness with her 24 years of board service. We next decided to ask Sue about what's keeping her motivated to stay involved with her association.
Well, I can't say that I'm really committed to keeping involved. I'm trying to do my exit strategy here. I never thought I would be on the board this long. My original goal was to, because it was a small community at the time and it was growing, I wanted to see us have some good policies and procedures in place that would serve the community in the long run. I think I've accomplished that goal. I don't think they need my really in-depth education like they used to. There's more available online for our board members to take classes. CAI has their volunteer class and stuff, and we will pay for that. If they want to attend that class, we will pay for that. So I don't think I'm as needed as I was, and I'd rather be knitting.
We certainly couldn't blame Sue for wanting to take a step back from board service, especially since she believes that she would be able to leave the board in a better state than when she found it. To get a sense of what her fellow board members would be missing, we next asked Sue about her personality and special talents that she brings to the board. Here's what she had to say.
I like to think of myself as a good listener, an active listener. And certainly when I'm hearing a complaint from the community or a comment or something, I will follow up a lot with questions to make sure I totally understand where we are and what the discussion is. But mostly just being patient. Again, back to my school counselor experience, just let the kid talk and, ask a few probing questions, and that typically gets me to where I'm going.
Sue's long term of board service has made us curious about the current board structure. After all, a board member serving for multiple terms can be a sign that the community at large is happy with what they're doing, but it can also be a sign that the community is too timid to get involved and challenge the current status quo. As such, we next asked Sue about the number of board seats, the length of terms, and if they use committees as a pipeline to get homeowners more involved with the community.
We have 9 board members. When we started out, we had 3 developer members. We're down to 2 developer members right now. One of those developer members has been on the board for 36 years. He's the longest serving board member. We're capped at 9 members under our corporate structure. So that will be the largest our board will ever get, will be 9. And we rotate in 3-year terms. 3 people serve for 3 years, and if they choose to move off the board, then another group of people will move on. So we always have some experience in the turnover. We don't really have committees. We've been using Carver's Policy Governance Model. So the actual only 2 committees that we have is a design committee for all our architectural review, and we have a covenants committee that is actually chaired by a homeowner that takes in all of our sort of complaints, if you will, or appeals. And that committee is made up of a group of homeowners, not, they might have previously been associated with the board, but they're not currently on the board. We let them review things and make a suggestion to the board on how we should proceed. So we don't really have any committee members. Sometimes if we have a special project, I'll ask for somebody to please take the lead on that. But other than that, no.
Sue mentioned something very interesting in her last answer, that her board uses Carver's Policy Governance Model as a leadership structure for their association. We asked Sue to elaborate further on this and explain in her words why it's so valuable to her community.
Well, there's several different ways that you can structure policy governance. CAI adopted the Carver Policy Governance design, and that's how they operate CAI in terms of what the Board of Trustees does is set policy, and there are limitations. For example, one of the limitations our executive director has is that she cannot exceed the budgeted line item. She cannot borrow money. So there's you set this policy as, I want to manage the community for the benefit of the community, but these are your limitations, and you set those limitations based on what works for you. Particularly in the reserve area, is we have a list of items that are on the reserve study, and off to the side what year they're about ready to be looked at more closely or repaired or whatever. And she just goes off and does that with the money that's in the reserve. She doesn't need to come to us and, have us pick a vendor and all that kind of stuff. They do all that in-house. And that frees us up for a lot of other things to think about, directions that we want to go in, and, kind of big picture thinking instead of small picture thinking. It's a different concept, I think, for a lot of people, particularly if you think that you're on the board and you're going to be choosing who supplies copy paper. I think that that's best left to the professional manager in the office. They can make those decisions. They don't need me to do that. But I know for some of my board members, they find it a little bit shocking that, we spent $70,000 to refurbish our fountain. Well, I never had a chance to vote on that as well. That's in the reserve study, and it was budgeted, and we have to do it because it's part of the community's assets. We're obligated, but it did kind of cause a little bit consternation that much money had to go into it.
Given Sue's dedication to using policy governance as a way to lead her board, it was clear to us that she was clearly motivated to make the community at HOA by Gentry a great place to live. Sue had a lot more to say about her association's operations, but first, let's take a quick break to hear from one of our generous sponsors.
Numbers matter, and we need numbers like game scores and bank balances to let us know where we stand. The same is true for your association. Is yours thriving or struggling? Let me introduce you to the FiPhO Health Score, like your own personal FICO credit score. Now in one simple number, owners and boards can learn the combined financial, physical, and operational health of their association. The good news, it's free at ourfipho.com. That's our, FIPHO.com. Learn how your association measures up.
And we're back. We left off with Sue explaining the value that Carver's Policy Governance Model brought to HOA by Gentry. We next asked her about what she felt about the association's operations as a whole.
We have a great staff. We've got some very dedicated people. We are seeing a lot of the post-COVID, maybe I really don't want to work issues, and I'd rather work from home, but this is a service-oriented job. You can't really do that from home. We're seeing some of that, and we've had some of that turnover. But my executive director started off as one of our regular kind of administrative employees over 12 years ago, and she's now the executive director with her large-scale manager designation. The same with some of my other employees. They could be people who actually own homes in the community, and they work for the community. So we've had good luck in that area. The design committee chairman that I met in 1997 is still on the job. He's also a homeowner and an architect. And so we've had a lot of continuity, and that's helped us not, knee jerk from one idea to the next, to sort of keep consistency. This goes back to what's fair and what's not fair. That if you're seen as being consistent, it's much easier to make the case that you're being fair, that somebody's not getting preferential treatment over somebody else. So that consistency would be a big theme for us.
Consistency is one of those attributes that keeps recurring in the conversations we have on this podcast. Most recently in episode 75 with Kevin Davis, where we talked about how boards need to consistently enforce their rules in order to minimize their liability exposure. We next asked Sue about her favorite and least favorite parts of serving on the board.
My most favorite aspect is just hearing about everything that's going on, having some thoughts and inputs on problem solving. I do like to think of myself more as a problem solver than anything else. That's been my favorite part, and just the different people that I've had to work with over that period of time. I've just made some tremendous friendships, and I still correspond with these people today, and try to meet up with them at CII National if they're still active. My least favorite part is trying to make the case that with 9,000 homes, our design guidelines have to be fairly tight, because to make too many individual decisions takes a lot of extra time and effort on the design committee's part, but also on the covenants inspector's part. And so we try to take subjectivity out of what we do. An example would be that we've had some homes that have a large plate glass window on the stairwell, and people had wanted to put some kind of tinting up there. We had to come to the decision that you could put up a frosted tint, a solid frosted tint, but we didn't allow for any other designs, because whether a design was appropriate or not is really subjective. And given our community's diversity, we just felt that would be, too much to manage. We also have a challenge of physical space for our staff to work out of based on the permitting and planning for our area. So for us to take on additional staff means we would have to go off campus and rent additional building space. And so all of that just adds to the dues impact. So we're trying to make that balance between efficiency and economy, and still letting folks have some expression. But when you're the one that wants to express, it's a little bit of a challenge to sort of accept that for the greater good, I'll just have to go with solid frosted tinting.
We noticed that Sue did not list board meetings as her favorite or least favorite aspect, as many of our board heroes have in the past. Given her community's size, we were curious as to how her association conducts their meetings. Listeners of episode 69 with Jim Hopkins will recall that his association broadcasts their meetings through their own cable company, delivering them to each resident's living room. So we asked Sue if they had a similar system or if they were able to hold board meetings virtually.
I don't believe that we can use hybrid or Zoom meetings under state law. There was the exception made during COVID, but other than that, we do need to meet in person. Since we're doing policy governance, we're not, deciding how many paper clips to buy at every meeting. We're setting policy. And so we meet 4 times a year. Our meetings last about an hour. We may or may not have an executive session, which again, probably wouldn't go more than an hour. So we try to get our business done. If somebody wants to chat over a problem, then I might schedule a Zoom to just have a little board working group on something. But I like to have the meeting move along at a crisp pace.
Keeping board meetings down to 1 hour is an admirable goal, but as we've heard from many of our board heroes, it's hard to achieve. We asked Sue about what she does to make sure board meetings are short and efficient.
Yeah, we put out a board packet of everything that is going to be discussed in the meeting and the agenda. And we ask our board members to please go over that packet before the meeting. And if there are any particular questions about something, to let myself or our executive director or the property manager know, so that if it requires some additional research, we can get that done and get that additional information out. We pretty much do not entertain anything off agenda. We'll listen to any proposals for new business, but it won't be a matter of discussion until the next board meeting, because it would just kind of go on and on and on and on and on. When I put together my board report, if I'm looking at needing a motion for something, I will put in a suggested motion already typed in so that people can read that. And if they want that motion, fine. If not, if they want to amend it, fine. But just to sort of keep things rolling along. I cringe at a poorly run meeting. And I think that any board that is kind of like, oh, God, I'm going to go to the meeting tonight, needs to take time to really learn the procedures of a well-run meeting and stick to it. Be disciplined to that. What it does is it respects everybody's time and effort. When you let things just drag on, my very first board meeting started at 6:00 in the evening. It ended at 11, and we never actually made a decision about anything. That was the first meeting for the property manager that retired. He and I looked at each other like, oh my God, what have we gotten ourselves into? But, letting stuff go on like that is disrespectful. It needs to be put in that kind of frame of voice that sticking to your agenda and not getting off on tangents and whatever, that's treating your board members and your audience with respect.
From her answers, it appeared that Sue was not facing much of a challenge in keeping board meetings concise and on track. With that being said, we did want to know about some of the biggest challenges she's faced as a board member. We thought she would have plenty of stories to share after all those years of service. Here's what she had to say.
The first meeting that our current executive director attended was the meeting where homeowners wanted to talk to the board about a halfway house for people in recovery from schizophrenia. And it was going to be put together in one of the communities. They were buying a house. The entity that was going to run it was buying a house. And why weren't they told? And, why can't, that's a business in our community, and having to bring the attorney in and explain to them that the Supreme Court has already said, this is the way you have to handle it. No, we can't we couldn't announce that it was happening because that would be a violation of the Supreme Court's decision. It was very much that sort of headbutting between what we knew from our attorney needed to be done and what people thought we should do. But it quieted down, and actually we really haven't had any kind of significant issues with this. I mean, it took that vendor a while to get used to our rules and regulations, and they'd made some improvements on the property without getting clearance, but we got that kind of tidied up. But other than that, it hasn't really had a negative impact on sales, or nobody in the community's been injured, or any of the traumatic, drastic, earth-ending events that were foretold. The other kind of big problem that we have, is parking. We have very little on-street parking. Every single-family home has a 2-car garage. And then the condos will have their parking for their units within their facility. But most of our families might have anywhere from 6 to 8 cars per household. And having that conversation that this community was never built and designed for each household to have that many cars. And on top of that, then they're also not parking at least 2 of them in the garage. The garage is the game room or the weight room or the party room or whatever it is. It's not being used to park a car. And so that is one of our really kind of big headaches. First responders, so the police and the fire and the ambulance services, will go down one of our dead-end streets and not be able to turn around at the end because the cul-de-sac is filled with cars. So they have to back out. But it doesn't seem to make an imprint on folks that, you might be the one in the ambulance. Then instead of charging out and getting to the hospital in a timely fashion, they're trying to back out several blocks down a street lined with cars. Unless the city and county, imposes some kind of horrific registration fees to discourage that, I don't see anything happening. We've got a terrific public transportation system, but for the most part, no, every teenager's got to have their own car. Some people hear the message, most people do not. But those are sort of our big challenges that we deal with on a continuing basis.
It was clear to us that Sue was very used to working with difficult personalities and managing the expectations of her community. And that brings us to a question I've been aching to ask. Sue mentioned before that her father was once a naval officer, and her son, Michael, followed in his grandfather's footsteps and was recently made Rear Admiral of the Navy's Defense Logistics Agency. Last time I saw her, that was the first thing she said to me. She was beaming about his promotion. Now, as the father of a Navy fighter pilot and the former president of a community association board myself, I've wondered if there was a common thread there. So we asked Sue about that, if there was a connection between her family's dedication to military service and her service to HOA by Gentry.
I've never thought of it that way, whether there's a clear link. I've said a couple of times when people have asked me, what are my skills that, are most beneficial to being president of the board? And I have to say, being a middle school counselor, because it's usually I'm explaining what it means to be fair and not fair, is sort of the crux of everything that I do. Perhaps that is something that I've translated to Michael over, his lifetime, and being respectful of other people and their lifestyles. Certainly, as a military brat myself, and my son was a military brat. We moved a lot, and you're constantly in and out of different communities with different cultures, and you need to be respectful of that. And not try to impose your culture on somebody else. You need to live within their culture. So I think that might be a thread. And I will reiterate that at the annual meeting before I take nominations from the floor. That this is not a place for your personal agenda. You're a fiduciary that must act in the best interest of the community as a whole. And we're looking for somebody who's going to not only have good answers, but ask good questions. Although we do have the odd board member who gets on and has an axe to grind, it's tends to not happen as much as it probably would.
Well, even if there isn't necessarily a direct line between Sue's board service and her son's military service, I think it's safe to say that her experience as a guidance counselor has been a good influence on both her board service as well as her son's military career. Since Sue is currently planning her exit strategy, we decided to close out this interview by asking her if there was anything that the board could do in 1 year to improve the overall health of the association.
Well, we're really trying to get all the board members into the policy governance frame of mind. I can tell that when we're talking about it, some people are just they're hearing it, but they're not getting it. I'm hoping that we will have finally made that total commitment to how policy governance helps us work efficiently. We're as I say, after COVID, we finally got our second community center online. I'd like to see that being used more, because that would be a great revenue source for us. But just having it sit there empty is not a good thing. Other than that, I think we're off to a good start. I can envision myself moving from the board onto the governance committee, because I have the longevity and I know how we decided certain things 10 or 15 years ago, and I can bring that wisdom, but I would rather not serve on the board after my term is up in February. I'd other folks to take over.
We wanted to publicly acknowledge Sue for performing a thankless job well and compliment the entire board of directors at HOA by Gentry for taking their responsibility seriously to act in the best interest of their association. We hope you gain some HOA insights from Sue's story and that it helps you bring common sense to your common area. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to another great episode next week. And remember, if you match our definition of a board hero or know someone who does, please reach out to us. Our contact details are provided in the show notes.
You've been listening to HOA Insights, common sense for common areas. If you like the show and want to support the work that we do, you can do so in a number of ways. The most important thing that you can do is engage in the conversation. Leave a question in the comment section on our YouTube videos. You can also email your questions or voice memos to podcast@reservestudy.com or leave us a voicemail at 805-203-3130. If you gain any insights from the show, please do us a huge favor by sharing the show with other board members that you know. You can also support us by supporting the brands that sponsor this program. Please remember that the views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the hosts and guests, with the goal of providing general education about the community association industry. You'll want to consult licensed professionals before making any important decisions. Finally, this podcast was expertly mixed and mastered by Stokelight Video and Marketing. With Stokelight on your team, you'll reach more customers with marketing expertise that inspires action. See the show notes to connect with Stokelight.